Thank you. I hope I grabbed some of your attention. It's early in the morning, I know. We need that attention grabber. Let me ask a question before we get started. How many came here this week as competitors? Oh, a lot of hands. Yeah, great. Who can tell me what it means to compete? What's the definition? Any idea? Nobody want to take a guess? You all know, you just don't want to say it. All right, so I'll tell you what Webster says. Webster says that to compete is to try to get or win something. That's the first definition. The second definition is to try to be noticed or accepted. I like that one better. Okay. And their third definition, which is my favorite, is to strive consciously or unconsciously for an objective. Okay, so what was your objective here this week? Anybody? To win the competition, yes. Okay, but beyond that, for me, and I think the whole point to what I want to talk about today is, I think the objective is the music. The objective is to find a way to bring out the very best in ourselves to have the very highest level artistic performance that we can get. And if we do that, we've won no matter what the judges say. Right? And if we've done that, we've been noticed. Okay? And I think that's what we're all trying to do when we sit in the practice room and we go out and we perform concerts. We're trying to be noticed. How many here want to play the trumpet for a living? Okay, that's a lot of hands too. All right, of those, how many want to be in an orchestra? Most. Okay, I got bad news for you. There aren't enough orchestra jobs for all of you. Okay, now, that doesn't mean you're not going to succeed. Okay? There just aren't enough orchestra jobs these days. They're going away. You've seen all the news about the orchestras that are failing and the orchestras that are out on strike and the orchestras that are being locked out. But just because there aren't enough orchestra jobs doesn't mean you can't succeed as a trumpet player and as a musician. Maybe you have to do something else. Maybe you have to be flexible. Maybe you have to invent something. Like I was talking with Ron Rahm last night, and he says he tells his students, you have to go invent something, like we did. And they say, oh good, we're going to go play in brass quintet. He said, no, it's been done, that's extinct. You got to do something else. Right? When I was most of your age, I didn't want to play in an orchestra. I had no desire to play in an orchestra, to be honest. All I wanted to do was play the trumpet. Didn't matter what. So when I was in school, I played in every single ensemble I could get into. And I played in the jazz band. I was lead in the jazz band for a year or so. I was the jazz player in the jazz band for a year. I played in the Contemporary Directions Ensemble. I played in the Symphonic Wind Ensemble. I played in the orchestra. I played in a brass quintet. I played in a salsa band in Detroit. I played lead trumpet for the New England Patriots pep band for a couple of years. You get the picture? I did anything anybody would let me do with the trumpet in my hand. When I left school, it took a while to find an orchestra job, kind of because I wasn't looking for one. My first job was with the United States Air Force Band. Some of you maybe heard the concert on Thursday afternoon. Again, I was just looking for something to do, and when I joined that group, they called me utility boy. I did anything they wanted. I did ceremonies, I did the concert band, I did the airman a note. My main position was assistant third cornet in the concert band, but I made it well known that I was willing to do anything. Yeah. Isn't that great? That was my first title job, assistant third cornet. Isn't that great? And I was thrilled with that job. I loved that job. And then, of course, President Reagan was in office at the time, and they asked me if I wanted to re-enlist at the end of 3 years, and I said no, and so they said bye. There was a manpower reduction. So fortunately, I had another job to go to. I played in brass quintet for a year, toured for a year with the brass quintet, and then I played a couple of years in the Charleston Symphony in Charleston, South Carolina, and then I happened to, Charleston didn't pay that much. Okay? I couldn't make a living playing that orchestra, so I taught. I played church gigs, I played recitals, and I just happened to be playing a recital as part of the Piccolo Spoleto Festival that got picked up by National NPR. And they broadcast it on Performance Today. And there was a gentleman in Atlanta who was driving to a job and realized he needed a trumpet player for a gig, turned on the radio, he heard my recital, called the radio station, who found me, and he got me in touch, And he hired me to go on tour with him for 2 years playing recitals in a little group called Toccatas and Flourishes. We were with Columbia Artists for a couple of years. My point, those of you who want to be an orchestra player, all right, when I finished that 2 years of touring, the first thing I did was I took an audition. I got the job in the New York Philharmonic. Okay? I was ready for it at that point. I probably wasn't ready for it before, but I didn't want it before. And I'm absolutely certain I would not have found that job in New York had I not done all those other things. Had I had the mindset that I'm just going to practice excerpts and I'm going to be an orchestra player, I don't think I'd be standing here today. Okay? My attitude was, I want to make great music and I want to be heard. Okay? And if you want to be heard, you have to have something to say. Okay? It's not about the notes, it's not about the rhythms, it's not about what a beautiful tone quality you make. It's about having something to say. It's about being a musician. It's about expressing yourself. And I think the other thing you need to succeed is to have discipline, and you need to have dedication. Okay? You have to want to do this really badly. I've been at it for a lot of years, and I can tell you I was not the most talented trumpet player when I was in school. Probably wasn't the most talented trumpet player at a lot of auditions I went to, but I worked harder than anybody else. I was focused and I was dedicated, and I was disciplined. My teacher, my primary teacher, was Armando Guitala, who was the principal in the Boston Symphony. Anybody heard that name? Oh, thank goodness. I gave a class not too long ago, and I asked the audience, how many have heard the name Bud Herseth? And I didn't see any hands. It's like, he's not been gone that long. Really? So Mr. Guitala had a great quote. He had dozens of great quotes, but my favorite was that the greater the discipline of practice, the greater the freedom of expression. Okay? Some of you are writing down. I'm going to say it again. The greater the discipline of practice, the greater the freedom of expression. Okay? Discipline in practice is really important. The time you spend in the practice room is, the number of hours you spend in the practice room is not nearly as important as how you spend them. Okay? There's a famous Abraham Lincoln quote. I hope I get it right. He said something like, it's not the years in your life, it's the life in your years. Okay? And as far as the trumpet goes, I don't think, I've just sort of changed it a little bit. I think it's not the number of hours that you practice, it's what you get done in the practice. It's how you practice. I have a question back there? Please.
Can we turn up the volume just a little bit? Some in the back are having a little difficulty. Just turn it up a little bit.
Sure. I can speak louder too. Oh, okay. So, okay. So the microphone is just for our web audience. I'll try to speak louder. Okay. Okay. So I think one of the things we need to do every day is be disciplined about our practice. A number of years ago, I had the great opportunity to meet Bud Herseth. It was my first year at the New York Philharmonic, 1993, and there was a huge spread on Mr. Herseth in the Smithsonian magazine. And so I knew he was coming to a rehearsal, so I brought my magazine and I asked him to sign it. And so he signed the article and he said, "Practice, practice, practice, Bud Herseth." Right? And I thought, gee, that's pretty cool. What's he mean by that? I didn't know much about the man other than his trumpet playing, other than to know that he was a very thoughtful person and he didn't waste words. So he was doing a class at Juilliard later, and I asked him in the class what he meant by that. And he said it's very simple. He said, I'm a little bit older now, and so I've changed it up. But when I was young, practice, practice, practice meant 3 practice sessions a day, no more than 45 minutes. And he said, if I go into a practice room and I know that when the clock strikes 45 minutes, I'm going to stop, then I know I can give 100% of mental and physical energy, and I'm going to get a lot of work done. If I walked into the practice room and I know I've got 3 hours to waste, I'm going to waste them. Okay? As he got older, he said it was 2 practice sessions, and he bumped them down to 30 minutes. When I hear students tell me that they're practicing 5 hours a day, first thing I say is, what are you doing for 5 hours a day? So write me a journal. Okay? Think about, do you have a goal when you start practicing? Do you have any objectives? Have you thought at the end of the day, have you reached those goals or objectives? Okay? And if you look at your your list of things that you've done in that 5 hours, I bet you could figure out how to make it 2 or 2.5 hours. Okay? I think for brass players, if you're late high school, well, no, college age, I think the perfect amount of time in a practice room on average is about 20 hours a week. Okay, and that 20 hours a week needs to include 1 day off. And what's a day off? Maybe you play nothing, maybe you play 30 minutes, maybe you play an hour, but you have to have 1 day where you don't do too much, where you let everything just relax and let the swelling go down and mentally get away from it a little bit. Because as you step away mentally, you come back the next day and you're more refreshed and you'll get more done. Now, I use the word balance. I balance my practice sessions every day with 3 basic sessions. They include conditioning, then the second one is technique, and the third one is music. Okay? And now before I explain what I do in those 3 sessions, let me make one point really clear. It's all about music. So if we're talking about long tones or pedal tones, or we're talking about Clark technical studies, we're always talking about making music. We're always talking about making a line, making a beautiful sound. So conditioning exercises. For me, conditioning exercises are anything I do to get the air moving, to get my lips vibrating, to get my corners solid enough to be stable. Okay? In other words, anything I need to do to start producing a good sound. Okay? I love to do pedal tones, bending tones. I do mouthpiece buzzing. I do lead pipe buzzing. Anybody here do lead pipe buzzing? Oh, good, a lot. I'll bet you I do lead pipe buzzing a little differently than you do. That's an A on the B-flat trumpet. Anybody practice that way? Start with that note? No. I've seen a lot of shaking heads. Good. Okay, what most of you do is you play the notes that are in the overtone series. Okay, and that's a great exercise. I'm just showing you a different one. That note that I just played is right in between 2 notes in the overtone series, and in order to get that note, you have to use very fast air. If you think about Mr. Schlossberg, that's where it all started, right? Schlossberg's exercises, I think, are all about teaching us how to differentiate volume from velocity. So this lead pipe exercise is all about getting velocity of air. Not a huge volume of air, but a lot of velocity, getting the air moving really fast so that we have a core to the sound and we have a sound that projects to the back of the hall without feeling like we got to blow our brains out. I continue that pattern until I'm 2 octaves up, 2 octaves down. Okay? I see a couple of people looking at me funny, like, why the heck is he pressing the valves? Right. Ear training. That's the only reason. Right. For one thing, I think trumpet players, we associate the air with our fingers. We associate a pitch with the fingers. So that's helpful, but I think also for me, when I first started doing this exercise, I'd do it at the piano, making sure that I was in tune. And if I press the valves down when I'm doing that, it's really helping me hear the notes. Because we know, if we can't hear the note, we can't play it, right? Okay, so that's one of my conditioning exercises. I love the exercises of James Stamp. I love the exercises of Chickowitz, Irons, Adam, and I play all that stuff. I don't do the same thing 2 days in a row the same way because I believe in the idea of cross-training. I'll give you an example. Mr. Gitala told me many, many years ago that you could play Clark Technical Study number 2. You could play from the low G on the first page to the middle C on the second page on one breath. And all you have to do is take the whole notes out. So you go from 8th note to 8th note, right? I took that as a challenge. And about 2 months later, I learned how to do it. I was efficient, my fingers worked really well, and I thought, gee, this is pretty good. I felt good about it, and so I kept playing that every day. That was my technical exercise every day. I went to Tanglewood that summer, and Roger Voisin heard me playing those and said, wow, I got to give this kid all the really tough technical stuff. And the first rehearsal in the first piece that had a lot of really difficult finger work, I couldn't play a lick to save my life. And he came to me and says, what's the matter? You're not feeling good today? I said, no, my fingers don't work. And what I realized was my fingers were trained to play Clark Technical Study number 2. They weren't trained to do anything else. Okay? And a funny story, I went home after that summer and I met up with my very first teacher. His name is Kenny Griffin, euphonium player, a marvelous musician, great educator. And I told Kenny this story, and he laughed and he said, yeah, here's the thing, Bobby. He's from Boston, right? He said, if I shave every day like this, top to bottom, every single day, after about a month, I'm going to go up to my wife and I'm going to grab her and try to give her a kiss. And she's going to push me away and say, Kenny, why didn't you shave today? He said, but I did. She said, well, feel your face. He said, oh, you know what? My whiskers learned that I was going to shave this way. So they started growing that way. So I didn't cut them off anymore. He said, you got to mix it up. Every once in a while, you got to go like this. So that was his take on cross-training. Okay? All right. So anyway, when I finish all my conditioning exercises, I don't have a specific time limit for that. What I have is the idea that I'm producing a good sound. I'm not forcing the sound. I'm not having to worry about this anymore. I'm not having to worry about the air production. It's just that system is working. Then I can move on to the next part of the day, which is technical exercises. My technical exercises, I try to cover, for me right now it's maintenance, but I'm maintaining all the techniques I'm going to need to use later in the day. Single tongue, multiple tongue, flexibility, fingers, range, long tones again, but now thinking about color. So I'll practice straight tones, I'll practice tones with vibrato. I'll try to get a warm sound, I'll try to get a bright sound. In other words, I'm trying to cover every technique that I might be called upon to use when I go to play music later. Now remember I said that it's all about music. So if I'm playing a Vizzuti technical study, I'm still trying to think of a line. It's still music. We have to always think musically. We can't just pick up a piece of music and then try to turn on a switch. I don't think we can ever do that. I think the switch has to be on all the time. Now, the whole point to those 2 practice sessions is so that by the time I get to the point where I'm playing music, I'm not thinking about the technique, I'm not thinking about the air, I can focus 100% of my energies on making music. And we'll get to that in a moment. But does all that stuff sound hard, difficult? Sounds like an awful lot of work, doesn't it? Well, it is an awful lot of work, right? But the most important word for me in all of this, after balance, is a very simple one: fun. Does what I just described sound like fun? Some people are shaking their heads, some people are looking, staring blankly. Yeah, I guess it doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun, right? But I think it's so important that we try to make it fun. Why did you start playing trumpet in the first place? You didn't start playing the trumpet because you thought it was going to be hard work. You started playing the trumpet because it sounded like a fun instrument to play, and you kept playing because you had a little success and you were having fun with it. Okay? And I think we lose that somewhere along the line. I lost it one night in New York. It was, I'm going to have to clean it up a little bit, this story, but it was a week or 2 before the tenure committee was going to vote. And I really didn't have anything to worry about, but, you know, I was worried anyway. So Phil Smith decided, or Court Mazur decided, that I should play everything for 2 or 3 weeks as the final test. So one particular program 2 weeks before this vote included a piece by Stravinsky, the Stravinsky Violin Concerto. And then if any of you are familiar with it, you know there's this little solo that starts out on a low C, fairly forte, I think, and ends on a high C piano. Very simple looking little lick. I practiced it. It was fine. I had no problems with it. But got to the first concert, and I chipped the high C. And the stress level was high. and I was a little anxious. And so, very uncharacteristically for me, I left the stage and I banged a door, and I think I threw my trumpet. And Vince Penzarella, who was the second trumpet player in the orchestra, looked at me and gave me a really awful look. So the next day I came in. Concert was at 8 o'clock. I got there at about 6:45. On the stage at 6:45, playing through that lick. I must have played it 100 times. And Vince comes out on stage at about 7:10, sits down with that stern look and says, "Are you going to have any fun out here tonight?" Yeah, I was too nervous to laugh, but yeah, it's funny, isn't it? And my answer to Vince was, well, if I play that lick well, I'll have some fun. He says, wrong answer. If you're not going to have fun, you get the bleep off my stage and the bleep out of my orchestra right now. I thought about that for a minute, and he angered me. And I went downstairs, and then I thought about it for another minute, and I thought, he's right. What's this all about? What's the worst thing that can happen if I miss that note? There's just a few people out there. You know, one note isn't going to make the difference between whether they vote yes or no. One note isn't going to make a difference as to whether somebody thinks I can play the trumpet or I can't. Okay, so from that moment forward, I started thinking every day, what can I do to make this fun again? Okay. Not long after that, I bought my kids, they gave me tenure. Yay. And after they gave me tenure, I went out and I bought my kids this huge swing set, play set, you know, with the climbing ropes and the rock wall and all that stuff out in the backyard. And my youngest went out there when they finished putting it together, and he was jumping, he was sliding, he was climbing, he was running. He came in about 3 hours later, drenched in sweat, exhausted. Like he could barely move. I said, was that fun? He says, it's the most fun I've ever had in my whole life. Right? And I'm thinking, this kid just worked his tail off for 3 hours, and he said it was fun. Okay? Can we relate that to what we do on the trumpet? Okay? The reward for the hard work, that's the fun. Okay. The whole point to building to doing all these exercises before we get to the music, and I'm going to talk about music in a minute, is we're trying to build a foundation. Okay? Someday, you're all going to finish school, you're not going to have weekly trumpet lessons anymore, and you need to have a solid foundation in playing the trumpet so that you can become your own best teacher. Okay? You've got to know what you do to play the trumpet that makes it work. You've got to know how to fix it if it goes wrong. Okay? So when it comes to learning the trumpet, and this gets back to the time spent in the practice room, I think there are two important facets to learning. The first is you have to have an intellectual understanding of a concept. In other words, you need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And you need to think about that concept all the time. Okay? Give you an example. The people, I hear this all the time, I've heard it a dozen times this week. You get, those people don't know what they're doing when they play stamp. Okay, it's great, I'm glad they're playing the stamp exercise, but they've obviously not been taught how to do it, or if they have, they forgot the concept. The concept is, that started out as a Louis Maggio exercise that was 4 whole notes making an arpeggio. And Mr. Stamp said, people were playing that exercise and they were telegraphing where they were going. They would drop their support and maybe drop the pitch and maybe drop the volume as they went from C to G. So he said, you got to stay up when you go down. I'm going to make you go up to remind you. So the C to D is just about reminding you to stay up. It's not about forcing the air and pushing or changing anything to play the D. It's about keeping everything the same to play the D. Right? Okay. So if you're doing an exercise and you don't know why you're doing it, ask your teacher. Find out. Okay? You've got to have that intellectual understanding of the concept, or I think you're wasting a lot of time. Now, it's not that playing those exercises wrong isn't going to do you some good, but they're not going to do you as much good as they could. Okay? The second facet to this process is then you have to put it into practice. You have to do it, and you have to do it enough that it becomes second nature so that you're not thinking about it anymore. I've had students who, I said earlier, spend 5 hours a day in the practice room. They're not thinking about that concept. They don't understand why they're in there. They're just putting in the hours and they think it's going to do them good. I also have had students, including my own son, who I hope is not watching because I'm going to use him as an example, who thought, I understand the concept. Why should I have to do that anymore? All right? 2 + 2 is 4. I learned that in kindergarten. I don't have to practice that anymore. I know how to make a sound on the trumpet. Why should I have to practice that anymore? Okay? I think the point is when we play the trumpet, when we play any brass instrument, maybe any instrument at all, we have to go back to day one every day. We have to start at the beginning. You have to be willing to go back and do the very simple things that you did when you first started so that you can maintain those and build upon them. Okay? You can't say, I know how to move my fingers now. I can play Clark too, and skip it. Okay? You got to practice those things every day, and you've got to find a balance every day. This foundation is really important. Let me give you another example. I love my little stories. My first orchestra job, I told you, was at Charleston Symphony in South Carolina. The night of the supposed first concert in that orchestra, Hurricane Hugo came through. Wiped out most of the city. Right? I had placed a deposit on a house in Charleston. Beautiful little house, brand new, nice slab, beautiful little one-story house. When Hugo was gone and they let everybody back into the city, I drove to that house and all that was left with this was the slab. Gone, right? I have friends who lived on the Isle of Palms, which is a little barrier island off Charleston. All the houses near the beach regularly got flooded. So they don't build foundations there. They build these beautiful $5–10 million homes on stilts so that when they get a storm surge, the water goes through and maybe gets their car dirty, but it doesn't harm their home. Problem is, this was not the ordinary storm. All those houses on stilts were gone. They floated off into the ocean. Downtown Charleston, on an area that they call the Battery, these old, beautiful homes, the worst that they suffered was a broken window or a missing shingle. Why? They had a solid foundation. Okay? Someday, when you finish school, you're going to encounter a storm. If you don't have a solid foundation and you don't know how to fix those little problems, you're going to be in trouble. And then you're going to be looking for another teacher again. Okay? But you're probably going to be working, so you're not going to have time to find a teacher, and you're not going to have the money to pay a teacher. So do it while you're in school. Do it now. Build that foundation now. Okay? I see a lot of nods. That's great. Do I have any questions? This doesn't need to be a soliloquy. Yes, sir.
So in the 3 sessions you talk about,
yes,
do you incorporate your technical and you did technique and your conditioning?
Yeah.
Is that what you would consider also as part of your warm-up? Is that kind of just one thing combined?
Yeah. He asked if I combine conditioning exercises and technical exercises into what we would call a warm-up. I don't use the term warm-up. Now, do we have to warm up? Yes. Okay. Part of what I do at the beginning of the day with the conditioning exercises is warming up. Part of what I do when I start my technical exercises is maybe I'm warming up my fingers, I'm warming up my articulations. But to me, it's more than warming up. It's about developing and maintaining these fundamental skills. So I do a class at Northwestern. We do it every Tuesday morning at 8 a.m., completely optional, because I know a lot of college kids don't want to be up at 8 a.m. And I don't call it warm-up class, I call it fundamentals class. And what we do is we go through a series of exercises, a different series of exercises every week, where we'll do some conditioning exercises and some technical exercises. And I try to introduce as many different kinds of exercises and concepts to the students as possible. Because I know that just because something works for me, it may not work for you. So the goal in that class is to expose people to as many different kinds of concepts and exercises so that you can figure out what exercises work for you. Okay. You're welcome. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Do you have like a specific example maybe of something that happened in your professional life where something stopped working and you had to kind of fix it yourself?
He asked if I have a specific example of where something went wrong and I had to fix it myself. Yes. The example I gave already about the fingers not working at Tanglewood is a good one. But I think the best example for me, and it's not something that something went wrong specifically with my trumpet playing, but I had an accident. I herniated 2 discs in my neck, and I wasn't able to play the trumpet for 6 months. And I'm going to come back to that for a second because there's something I think is important about that. So at the end of 6 months, I had to start all over again. Okay? So the fact that I knew what I should be doing and how I should be doing it, I was able to put my trumpet playing back together in a fairly short amount of time. If I didn't know what the concepts were and I didn't know how to do that, I would have been lost. And again, I probably wouldn't be standing here today. Okay? But let me go back to this idea of why I herniated my discs in my neck. There were 2 reasons. One is because I play the trumpet, and the second is because I used to run half marathons. And what was happening was I played the trumpet, and Mr. Guittala always taught us the thumb goes in here, the 3 fingers here, so that we press the valve straight up and down, okay? Which I'm sure Mr. Malone would appreciate, because if you don't press the valve straight up and down, you wear the valves unevenly, and then he or somebody else is going to have to fix them for you. So press them straight up and down. But when I did this, I always played, my right shoulder was higher and further forward than my left. And I got to the point after many years of playing where my right shoulder was permanently 1.5 inches or 2 inches higher and further forward than my left, which meant that all the muscles in my back were out of whack. I was completely out of symmetry. Add to that the pounding that I was doing running, and it was inevitable. Okay, so I herniated these 2 discs and spent 9 months in physical therapy. And one of the important things I found is part of my conditioning exercise every day is making sure that even if my shoulder goes this way when I'm playing the trumpet, that I'm getting it back where it belongs the rest of the day. So I do some of the exercises that the physical therapist taught me, and I've incorporated these into this fundamental class that I do with my students. So one of the things we do is we start every day with, we hold our arms this way and just do circular pattern forward, then maybe a circular pattern backwards, then maybe a figure 8. And the point is, what you do is you hold this and you keep doing this until you can no longer keep your arms parallel to the floor. Okay? When they first start, it's about 30 seconds for some of them. We got them up to, most of them I got them up to about 5 minutes. But the point to that is to make sure that we're maintaining a symmetry and you don't end up with the neck and shoulder problems that I have. Okay? Now, all of this stuff so far is all just, he asked about warm-up. To me, it's a physical and a mental preparation to playing music. Okay? So when I start practicing and I'm playing music, I want to make sure that I'm doing a couple of things. I think the most important thing we do in the practice room every day is we build confidence. Okay? As we have successes, we have to think about those successes. We have to hold on to them dearly. We need to remember what they felt like. We need to remember what they sounded like. And that's part of this focused concentration in the practice room, I think, that a lot of people just don't have. You keep playing over and over and over and over again, right? A good friend of mine took a lesson many, many years ago with Mel Broyles. Anybody know Mel Broyles? Yes, thank you, good. All right, so Mel was the principal trumpet at the Metropolitan Opera for many years. And so this friend of mine went to his first lesson with Mel, and Mel brought him into the pit at the Met and said, he stood him at the bottom of a staircase and say, play Leonora 2. So he played it. He says, that's good. Step up to the first step and play it again. So he played it again. And it went well. He says, that's good. Step up to the next step. Play it again. He made a little mistake, clammed a note. Mel says, back down to the floor. Play it again. You can see where this is going, right? So he played it again, got to the first step, second step, third step, fourth step, fifth step, made a mistake, back to the floor. And he just looked at Mr. Broyles, and Mr. Broyles says, lesson's over when you reach the top of the staircase. Right? 18 steps, I think. So, an hour later, when he made it to the top of the staircase, all Mr. Broyles said was, lesson number 1, consistency. That's a tough lesson, right? But the thing that I take from that lesson is that most of us, when we're in the practice room, let's say we're playing Petrushka. The guy in the practice room next to me when I auditioned at the New York Philharmonic, this was him. He played Petrushka 10 times. The first 9 times he made a mistake. 10th time was perfect. So he put the trumpet in the case. He felt good. He knocked on the door, he goes downstairs. The first excerpt they ask him to play is Petrushka. Was he thinking about number 10 or number 1 through 9? Yeah, number 1 through 9. He played a combination of 1 through 9. Yeah. Okay. So Mr. Broyles, although that's an extreme example, I think his point is you don't stop practicing when you get it right. You start practicing when you get it right. Okay. A number of years ago, we were doing a concert in New York, and Emmanuel Axe was the guest soloist, and he played on a children's concert. And this children's concert was, we just played a couple of different pieces from the main program, and so what Mr. Axe played was 1 or 2 movements from the Beethoven First Piano Concerto. When he finished playing, they put microphones in the aisles and asked the students, the young children, to come up and ask questions. So we had a couple of interesting, fun questions, and then this 5 or 6-year-old little girl comes up and asks, "Mr. Axe, what's your favorite piece?" We got a lot of snickers in the orchestra. And he turns to us and shushes us and says, "No, that's a great question." He said, "Today, my favorite piece is Beethoven's First Piano Concerto. If I want you to love this piece, if I want you to feel something about this piece, I have to play it like it's the greatest piece ever written. I have to play it like it's my favorite piece. I have to delve so far into this music and think about everything Beethoven wanted so that you have the best opportunity to understand it and hear it and like it and love it." He said, "Now ask me that same question next week." The answer is Rachmaninoff too, because that's what I'm playing in Cleveland. Okay? So his point is, and my point, every time you pick up a piece of music, it doesn't have to be the greatest piece of art, okay, but you have to play it like it's your favorite piece. Okay? Now, I started out the hour by saying you have to have something to say. If you're playing a piece of music and you don't like it, the audience is going to tell that, and they're not going to want to listen to it. Any questions? Yes, sir. Please.
Asking about consistency.
Yeah.
When I'm practicing, I have a bad habit of practicing for too long because when I was practicing in high school, I would do the 9 times wrong, 1 time right,
Yep.
point away thing. And now I do it 9 times wrong, and then I want to get it 10 times right, and then at that point I've been playing for an hour and 15 minutes, and my face is really hurting. How do you manage those 2 elements of playing?
I think, once again, you have to have balance and you have to set limits. You have to set goals. If the goal is 10 times right, that's a great goal. But if the limit is 45 minutes or an hour, then at that point you have to stop. And then you have to continue that goal the next session. It's really easy to get carried away and just keep playing. I've been there, I've done it. But you have to, I use the word discipline, you have to be disciplined about shutting down. The process of building muscles is you have to break the muscle down slightly, and then oxygen comes and rejuvenates it, and it gains a little strength. But if you break the muscle down too far, then the oxygen's going to come and it's not going to build up even to the point where you left off, where you started off. Okay? So you have to be disciplined about stopping at a certain level. You're the only one that knows when you're fatigued. Okay? But if you're given 100% effort, my Boston accent again, effort. If you're given that 100%, then I don't think you will play beyond 45 minutes. I don't think you'll play beyond that point of fatigue. Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? I was told to watch the clock, but I don't see one.
20 over.
Okay, great. All right. Yes.
Related to that point about over-practicing, how do you incorporate, you were saying 20 hours a week roughly, how do you incorporate, okay, you got a 2-hour practice, rehearsal with one band on Tuesday night, and then Wednesday nights got a 3-hour rehearsal. I don't want to wear myself out on Wednesdays because, that isn't good. How do you adjust for that? What do you, shorten the rehearsal on Wednesdays and maximize it on Thursdays, or do you just count the rehearsal time in your 20 hours?
Good question. And she asked how we balance our practice time with our rehearsal and concert time. And I think, for me, I'm counting for my students. I don't practice 20 hours or more anymore. Okay, I don't need that anymore. But I think the students need that, the younger students, because you're building that foundation. As we get older and we've built the foundation, we're just maintaining. And maintenance takes a lot less time and effort than building does. Okay, I'm watching a building going up next door to me, and they're spending an awful lot of time on the foundation. Yay! It won't fall into the lake. Okay, so the 20 hours is if you're building that foundation. If you've already built the foundation, you're maintaining, so you need less time. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is I think we have to find a balance in our playing every day related to practice and performance. And I think, and even the kind of practice we do. If I'm playing Zarathustra or Mahler 5, I'm not going home and practicing big, heavy, loud stuff. I got enough of that in the rehearsals. I'm going to practice Bousquet, maybe, or Concone. I'm going to practice things that are a different style. If I have a very easy program, if it's an all Mozart week, I'm going to go home and I'm going to take out top tones and maybe Charlier. And I'm going to balance my entire performance day to make sure that I'm getting everything I need throughout the course of the week. That answer your question?
Yes.
Good. Thank you.
Well, and also, though, you went through the 6 months where you were a comeback player.
Yes.
A comeback player. So the foundation needs work, too.
Okay, yeah.
It's going to be a lot of hours.
Yeah, but I think if you've built that foundation years ago, even if you're a comeback player, it'll come back faster than the first time you built it, because a lot of the muscle memory is still going to be there. Yes, sir.
If you played that James Stamp exercise correctly,
Yes.
would I recognize the difference from the way you first played it, or only you recognize that?
Oh, I hope you would recognize it. Yeah. He asked if he would recognize the Stamp exercise played correctly. Now, I never studied with Mr. Stamp. Mr. Gitala spent many, many, many hours with Mr. Stamp, so I get it secondhand. But again, I explained the way I think it's supposed to be done. And so the idea is that we're blowing through the C and we're letting the trumpet do the work. We're not changing the aperture. We're not changing the airstream. It's just like Mr. Chikowitz's flow study. The idea is that the air should stay the same, the support should stay the same, and we press the valve and the note changes because the trumpet forces the note change. Did that sound different to you? Here's what I did the first time. I changed my air. I bumped on the D, I bumped on the A, and I played those higher notes louder, because the trumpet tells us we're supposed to, right? Higher notes are supposed to be louder than softer notes, aren't they? Okay. So when I'm doing that exercise and I think I'm doing it correctly, it's when I'm not changing the air at all. I'm keeping the air and the velocity and the volume the same throughout. And in order to maintain that smoothness, I'm going to buzz it a few times. When I buzz it, I have to keep the support going. I have to keep the aperture flexible. I love those exercises. I think for a warm-up, they're a little bit demanding because of the fourths and the fifths. So I prefer at the beginning of the day something like the Chikowitz flow study. The Chikowitz flow study, I never got to meet Mr. Chikowitz, but the way I look at it is, who here has to change their aperture or their support or the volume of air to play a minor second on the trumpet? No show of hands. Great! You don't have to change. So, in other words, the trumpet should do that. My air should be absolutely steady, my support should be absolutely steady, and if my aperture is flexible and I hear the right note, the trumpet will play it for me. Okay, we just all said we don't need to move for a minor second. The next interval is just adding another minor second. So if I don't need to move for a minor second, do I need to move for another minor second? Good, no. The air is absolutely steady. The support is absolutely steady. Question?
I'm confused. If the air is absolutely steady, nothing changes, you press a valve down, the tubing is long, but why doesn't the pitch go down?
The part you missed is if I'm hearing the right pitch. Okay. Right. Yes, I'm hearing. Okay. Now the all right. He said for those at home, the tube is longer. The pitch shouldn't go up. It should go down. Okay. Technically, yes. So I'm not changing the amount of air. I'm not changing the support. I'm hearing the right pitch, and there's a slight adjustment in the aperture. Okay. But if I think about changing the aperture, I'm going to move it too much, and I'm going to get the wrong note, and I'm going to get a note that's out of tune. So it's all about this flexibility of the aperture. That's why I do the mouthpiece buzzing first, and that's why I have a glissando in the mouthpiece buzzing to make sure that the aperture is flexible. But I'm not thinking, when I'm playing, I'm not thinking about changing the aperture. I'm allowing the aperture to do what it's been trained to do. If I hear the right pitch and the aperture is flexible, I'll get the right note. That explain it better? Good. Okay. Then this process continues. The entire Chikowitz flow study is just a succession of more minor seconds. We have a minor second, then a major second, then a minor third, and a major third. Okay? And if the concept is that we never change the air or the support, we're going to get what Mr. Chikowitz wanted, which is a smooth change from one note to the next. We're going to get an even flow from one note to the next. And I think one of the things we do as trumpet players, and we do it early on, is every time we press the valve, we bump the air. And that's what he's asking us to try to eliminate from our playing. And if you don't understand that when you practice this exercise, you're going to go ahead and keep bumping. I've got students who have been playing these exercises for years, and they still play. And that's exactly what the exercise is designed to teach us not to do. Okay? So we want to concentrate on the concept, and again, make sure the aperture has to be flexible, and that's why the mouthpiece buzzing is so important, and that glissando is important. And speaking of the glissando, I like a fairly fast glissando. Mr. Stamp's concept is, remember, we want to make sure that a pitch stays exactly in tune before we change. And for me, when I do a very slow glissando on the mouthpiece, I tend to start telegraphing, which is exactly what he's asked us not to do. Right? So, and on the other hand, if I slot notes on the mouthpiece without any glissando whatsoever, I'm bumping the notes. And so I'm not getting the smoothness that I need. So we talked about repetition a little bit. Okay. Repetition, a good word in the practice room, bad word? It depends. Thank you. Somebody said it depends. Yes, it depends on whether the repetition is rote repetition or the repetition is trying to gain a higher artistic level. Mr. Gattala used to tell us that we should open up the back of the Arbin's book and go to the section that says the art of the phrase, and we should play one of those 10 times. But we should take a little time between each repetition. Each repetition should grow artistically. Every time we play it, it should be a little bit better. We should be searching for ways to make it sound more beautiful. We should be searching for ways to make it sound more artistic. If it's supposed to sound angry, we should try to work to make it sound angrier. Although I don't know that there's any in that section that are angry. But whatever the emotion that we're trying to get across to our audience is, we need to try to get more and more with each repetition. So the repetition is a great idea as long as you're thinking about why you're repeating it, and you've got this concept that the repetition is going to make it better. One more thing about practicing. I said earlier, I started on my concept of building confidence in the practice room. I heard I watched a great YouTube video the other day, a very famous violinist who said, you should never, ever, ever practice the things that you're good at. You need to spend all your time in the practice room on the things that you're bad at. Okay, I'm going to respectfully disagree. Okay? I think it's extremely important to practice the things that we're not good at, because we have to take our weaknesses and we have to turn them into strengths. And the only way you do that is by not avoiding them. And yes, it's tough on the ego, but you have to practice those things that are difficult. But before I start practicing the things that are difficult, I start with practicing the things that I do well. Not necessarily easy, but the things that I do well. And when I practice the things that I do well, my confidence goes up. And I start feeling good about myself, and I start feeling good about the way I'm playing the trumpet. And then I can approach those more difficult things with a much better attitude, and I'm going to get a much better result. Okay? So I think we, again, need to find that word, balance. Balance between the things that are difficult and the things that are not so difficult, so that we continue to grow completely. If we ignore our strengths for a long time, they're going to become weaknesses. Okay? So we want to make sure we're maintaining the strengths and building on the weaknesses. Okay? And maintenance takes less time than building. Okay? Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
How do you go about learning rep? What's your process?
Yeah, he asked how I go about learning new repertoire. It doesn't matter whether it's a solo or it's a new orchestral piece. I get the score. If I'm a couple of years ago, I commissioned 5 composers to write new pieces for me. And a couple of them sent the trumpet part and not the piano part. And I said, I can't do this. Where's the piano part? Well, I'm still working on fixing some things. Well, okay, but I'm not going to look at your trumpet part yet. I look at the piano part. I want to know how my part becomes part of the music. Okay? When I'm playing the trumpet, unless I'm playing a solo unaccompanied piece, I'm only part of the process. Okay? So I start by studying the score, and then I move on by usually singing through the score, singing through the trumpet part at least as I'm watching the score. And when I first start practicing it, I'll practice in small sections still from the piano part or from the score. If it's a piece that I'm learning for the first time that has a recording, I'll get a recording or two. When I was at New York, I had very little orchestral experience when I started, and we had a lot of repertoire, so I got a lot of CDs. And I found it was really important to make sure that I had access to more than one CD, more than one recording of any piece. I tried to get at least 3, so that I found a balance between styles and tempi, and some conductors like something really slow, some want it really fast, and you find after you listen to 3 or more recordings that there's an average. Okay? And that's where I wanted to practice. Can I answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Nothing? You know, my students could tell you I could talk all day long, but it does you better if I if I answer some of your questions. No? Oh, yes.
Sorry, I realized I didn't have a second part.
Good.
So that's the musical side, but like the technical side. You have a passage that's just not working right away. But besides like just slowing it down and playing, do you have any other ways that you go about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. He asked about technical passages when you're learning a new piece of music. And that's a great question, because one of the things I alluded to, I didn't really say it yet today, was that, or maybe I did, by the time I finish my conditioning and my technical work and I play music, I want to think about music and music alone. That is the dream. That's the goal. It's not always reality, especially if you're learning something new. So there are times when you have to take a phrase apart and you have to look at it differently than it's on the page. I think if we play what's on the page exactly the way it's written on the page every time, just over and over again, we don't get to that end result very fast. I think we have to step back. Slurred passages I'll start articulating. Articulated passages I'll slur. I'll change the rhythm. I'll change something that's got a lot of leaps. I might do some octave displacement, and take the large leaps out and find a very simple melodic pattern. I do something that I call making a skeleton of something. I'll look at a piece and I'll pick the 1 or 2 or 3 important notes in that bar, harmonically or melodically. And that part is important, harmonically or melodically, because sometimes the important melodic notes create a line that does this. So I'm finding a couple of important notes in each bar and making a very simple tune, a very simple melody. And as I practice that simple melody, I understand the concept of what the composer was trying to get at, and then I can start adding in all the rest of it. Anybody ever read the book by Aaron Copland, What to Listen For in Music? Yay, one hand, two hands. Yeah, oh, good, okay. I think there's a couple of really important things that Mr. Copland talks about. And with the time we have left, I want to touch on a couple of those very briefly. One is, he said, the job of a performer is to get to the root of what the composer heard, felt, wanted from the beginning. So he said, unfortunately, he said he as a composer, he'd have this idea in his head, and this idea would just keep growing and growing and growing, and he'd end up with this beautiful long line, and then he'd have to write it down. He'd write black dot, followed by a black dot, followed by a black dot, followed by a big black line. And he said most young performers look at those black dots, black dots, black dots, black lines, and they see things very vertically. And he said, the point, your point, as a performer, as an interpreter of music, is to find that long line that the composer intended. So he asks us to go through a little process. He said, if you look at a piece and you see two two-bar phrases, look at it again. Can it be a four-bar phrase? If the answer is yes, now we've got two four-bar phrases. Look at it again. Can you make it an eight-bar phrase? If the answer is yes, look again. We got two eight-bar phrases. Can it be 16? At some point, you're going to say no. But you have to continue this process until you say no. Okay? And I find that young musicians don't do that enough. Young musicians play far too vertically. Okay? And I think what you want to do as you look at your piece is to try to find that long line that the composer intended. Find that chapter in that book, because I'm not doing a great service here. Okay? I'm giving you just the bare bones. The other thing I think that's really important, and this becomes 4 chapters, is he was asked to describe or define what music is. And he said, now I can't really define what music is, but I can say that music has 4 basic elements. The first element is rhythm, the second element is melody, the third element is harmony, and the fourth element is tone color. Okay? If teachers here, if you've asked a young student to play more musically when they play the second movement of the Haydn Concerto, what's the first thing they do? They throw rhythm out the window. Their expression in their musical is to ignore the rhythm. Okay? And if we believe Mr. Copland, and we have to for classical music, rhythm is the most important, the first basic principle. Okay? We have to find a way to express ourselves without changing the rhythm. Okay? We need to know, are we playing the melody or are we not playing the melody? Are we playing an inner line? Okay? And the answer to that is, I think we're always playing a melody. Anybody familiar with the Arnold Jacobs concept, wind and song? Good, all right. First person I ever heard talk about it was Charlie Vernon, the bass trombone player in the Chicago Symphony. And Mr. Vernon is an incredible trombone player. He can play every trombone there is. He's got a recording, I think, where he plays like 8 different instruments and he puts them all together. An incredible musician. But I heard him talk about this concept once, and he said, I'm a better bass trombone player than, technically, physically, I can play this instrument better than I play any of the others. That's why I keep winning bass trombone auditions. And I'm a good bass trombone player, musician, because I believe in this concept of wind and song, which is everything I play is a melody, everything I play is a song. Okay? This goes back to making even our technical exercises musical. He said, if I treat my line like it's a beautiful melody, I'm going to support the upper voice even better. That makes me a good section player. I think far too often, in my experience, trumpet players especially, but most instruments in the orchestra, we all decide, I want to be first trumpet. And then when you get assigned the second trumpet part or the third trumpet part, right? You're not a good section player if you're doing that. You have to approach your part like it's just as important, because it is. Right? If the notes weren't important to be there, the composer wouldn't have written them. Right? So approach everything like it's a song. Approach everything like it's important. And I think you'll find that you're expressing yourself much better. And then you've got something to say, and then you've got something that people want to hear. Questions? All right, I'm going to finish, see if I can make the trumpet work by just playing one short little piece.